We have gathered the stories of how funding matters for our children. In our schools for the past 4 years, funding was being delivered as part of the 6-year agreement that Malcolm Turnbull has trashed, an agreement that was signed with the previous Labor government and state and territory governments around the country. So we have stories. We know the power of resources and we know that it can change children's lives. In South Australia, there's a school, I'm not going to name schools or children, but I'm going to share a couple of stories. There's a school that proudly displays the comments from their students who have benefited from funding that was delivered under the Gonski Agreement, benefited with literacy and numeracy intervention support, and there is a sign there from a Year 7 student which will stay with me forever as a primary school teacher. And that sign says, "I can now read. For the first time this year, I read a book." It's a simple pleasure, just think about that, a simple pleasure that many of us take for granted, and yet for that child, it has opened up a whole new possibility for their future. Here in Queensland, I met a sandy-haired fellow, I think he was about 12, deep shadows under his eyes, scrawny little fellow who'd been in foster care, several foster homes, and he was a child who had significant learning difficulties. He couldn't read, he couldn't write, and he exhibited very strong behavioural problems in the classroom. I ran into him after 6 months of a literacy intervention program that had been funded by the first 4 years of that funding. And he was sitting there working with his multi-lit tutor. He was engaged, he was reading, he was writing, and he came up and he said to me, "For the first time in my life, I got to go on a school camp because his behaviour had settled enough that he got to participate in something that most children get to do and take for granted." In New South Wales, there's a fantastic young woman. She was 16 and she came to Canberra with us. She's of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander background. She's a fantastic young woman who's now heading off to university, but she came to Canberra to talk to the press gallery, to talk about the importance of making sure that our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children can close the 3 to 5 year achievement gaps that they experience when compared to children who come from more advantaged backgrounds. And I'll never forget this brave young woman standing up in front of the press gallery, something that I find quite intimidating from time to time, sharing her story and sharing her story about her community and the importance of this funding. And just a couple of weeks ago, I sat next to an elder from a remote community in Northern Territory, and he shared with me his concerns about the students that were graduating at Year 12 who could not read and write, and the fact that we know in the Northern Territory under this plan, $71 million has been removed from Northern Territory schools in this year and next year alone.